Today, you're going to hear the story of a mom whose son experienced inexplicable healing from a serious heart condition. Hey, lady. Welcome to the Postpartum on Purpose podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Annemarie. I'm married to James and mom to 5 beautiful kids, ages 9 and under, with 1 miscarried baby. Here, we see postpartum, all the way from birth to the first year of life, as a time of grit, growth, and grace. This is episode 91. What's up, lady? I hope you were well. Without further ado, let's get right into things. If you've been around a minute, you know that we start off with free things, which is mental shorthand, a gentle reminder to myself, just as well as to you, that there is 1, always something to be grateful for, and 2, that a rich, beautiful, meaningful life is available to each of us, no matter the size of our budget or our family. I've got some really fun free things this week, and the first of them is actually from 2 weeks ago because I forgot last week. But my son's piano teacher offered both he and I free tickets to the symphony orchestra. We got to hear a live performance of music. I just really appreciated that. And then last week, which was Mother's Day, there were several different free things that I took advantage of with the kids. And 2 of them involved potting plants, which is really funny because did the little kids want to pot the plants? No. Who did the potting of the plants? Me or the workers at the store that we went to. And they mostly just grumbled and complained and a little bit picked out the color of flowers that they wanted. But it was still really enjoyable. I brought home several different potted flowers and we had a couple of extras. So we gave them to some of our Grandma Tribe members as a thank you for their mothering of my children as well. And then lastly, I went to, 2 things actually. One more, Chick-fil-A. You know how I feel about Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A had a free flower bouquet for moms. If you went in, you got to pick out 4 stems and then a piece of greenery, and their employee would just wrap them up in a really pretty craft paper bouquet bag, I guess, for you. And that was just so nice. I cut mine really short, actually, trimmed them very, very small, and put them into this really beautiful crystal not teacup, I don't know, just like crystal cup. There's a huge pitcher and then there's this very little miniature pitcher. I don't know what else to call it, but it looks beautiful. And the last thing is that my kids and I went to this monthly play date that we go to. It's both children's adoration and a lunch play date afterwards. And one of the moms there has a much larger family than we do. And she got a call from the local food bank and they said, hey, we have all of this fresh produce that is about to expire or like we're afraid it's going to expire without being taken. Would you be able to find homes for these 5-pound bags of clementines? And we brought one of those home. And that was just a real gift too, because then we were able to share it with lots of people that we know. All of those things, free things, just made my heart very happy last week. And then the one small change for this week, and one small change, is just a reminder that there's always something that is shifting, changing, going away, getting better. Just nothing is staying exactly the same all the time in postpartum, which is to counter this idea that everything is hard, challenging, or impossible and always will be. One small change is just that little reminder that no, it's not. No, it's not. Things change. And the one small change is sort of just a reflection I have of this idea that we have a routine or a loose schedule for the family that I really like now. We go grocery shopping, and this might sound like, okay, you go grocery shopping, but I've just found it really anchors the week well. We go grocery shopping on Wednesday while my son is at piano lessons. We go to 2 different places, so we go one of them while he's at the lesson, and then the second store we go to with him. And I've just found that way we are going into the weekend fully stocked with food, which just makes everybody a little bit more relaxed, jovial maybe, rather than previously I was going on, what was that, Friday? No, I was going Mondays. Well, then by the weekend, I was really proud because we cleared out the fridge. Ta-da, me. We didn't waste any food. But then on Saturday night or Sunday, my husband was opening these very sparse-looking shelves, bare-looking shelves in the fridge and just thinking like, wow, we're on survival rations here. The shift to go to Wednesday came because we needed to do that. We were going to be in town. I needed to figure out something to do with all the kids for an hour. But it's just been a real blessing that we are doing it then. And at one point we went on Thursday mornings Thursday afternoons as part of his previous piano lesson teacher. And that worked okay too, but Thursdays are our last day of the school week, and I just found that Thursday morning, finishing up all the school, trying to get finished between working from 8 until 12, and then going all afternoon, running errands and grocery shopping. By the end of the day, Thursday, I was just exhausted and not as excited for the Friday, Saturday, Sunday that we had available to us, just because I was tired. But this pace works so much better. We grocery shop on Wednesday. Thursday is the end of school, but then there's not this big to-do afterwards that's scheduled every single week that we have to do. And then the weekend sort of flows after that. So that's the one small change. All right, getting down to brass tacks. Our guest host for today is Sarah. She lives more or less locally to me, about half an hour away. And I became familiar with her son's story. I already knew her family fairly well, but I became familiar with her son's story because he and I share a birthday. We're both born on December 20th. And I guess that just gave me a special spot in my heart for him because I was praying for him because he was so sick so immediately after he was born. Of course, they knew, as you'll hear in the story a little bit more, they knew a bit in advance that things were serious. But yeah, it just became very clear shortly after birth, oh man, wow, things are really tough. And so I was not close to the situation while it was unfolding. But I prayed very earnestly, along with many, many other people from all over the country and maybe from the world, I don't know, for his healing. And then it happened. It actually happened without, as you'll learn, without a lot of explanation. And so I just asked Sarah if she'd be willing to share some of her experience of being a mom of a child who was so ill, and then, as you will hear, having her own experience of complications, medical complications, in that same time frame during which he was so sick. I just thought that would be worth having that testimony so that you can have some solidarity, perhaps, if your situation is anything like hers, of going through the uncertainty of a child who is just really ill right away, and also the gift and the blessing of knowing that God continues to work in ways that we do not understand. He continues to work in ways, he's, as they say in the Chronicles of Narnia, Aslan is on the move, is the line that comes back to me. But I hope you so enjoy this. I was really blessed that Sarah agreed to share it.
Hi there, my name is Sarah Williams, and big thanks to Annemarie for letting me come on her podcast. So just here today to share my story of Nicholas and our postpartum journey. I am the mother of 11 children. I only can see 5 of them. We have lost 6 children through miscarriage, and that's kind of a story for another time. My pregnancy journey has been not at all what I would have expected it to be, but I'm here today to talk about our 5th child here, and his name is Nicholas. And so ended up having kind of an unexpected late-term diagnosis for Nicholas, and some complications that we were not anticipating. And so I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So as I said, my husband and I have been through a lot of loss. My children were praying and asking for another sibling, and my husband and I knew that we would probably like to have another child. I had gone through some surgery recently for some endometriosis removal. It had been kind of a journey because of my repeat loss, and sort of an investigative process because I'm obviously able to have children and carry full-term pregnancies, but kind of the strange thing about my story is I just have a lot of these miscarriages interspersed between my live births. And so we were looking to add to our family, and excited to hopefully achieve that after I had the surgery to remove some of the endometriosis that they found. And so I became pregnant with Nicholas in April of 2024. And so it was a pretty exciting thing. I ended up finding out I was pregnant shortly before Mother's Day, which is a really special thing. Because of our history of loss, we decided not to tell our kids until a little bit later. But the first part of the pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I have tended to lose a lot of children around 13 weeks. So I'm kind of in a 0.2% or a very, very obscure minority of women who lose a baby after seeing a healthy baby with a healthy heartbeat at 8 weeks. For me, I always breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief if I can get past 13 weeks and I still have the baby with me. So it was exciting to see that. I remember, the nurse bringing out the Doppler at 13 weeks for Nicholas, and of course, just feeling anxious and not knowing what was going to happen, still feeling pretty positive about this pregnancy. But I remember her finding the heartbeat on the Doppler. I was really hoping we wouldn't have to go into ultrasound. And so she found the heartbeat on the Doppler right away. And she said, "Oh, well, that baby's running away from me." And I remember just laughing because even anytime Nicholas had to be monitored during my pregnancy, he did not like it. And I remember telling my mom, this baby is strong. I know this baby is strong. And so everything went along relatively uneventfully. I believe it was at my 20-week sonogram, whenever we went to do the anatomy scan, that they found out that I had placenta previa. And so that's not uncommon, especially for somebody who has my background. It can also be more common with people who have had multiple losses. But I'd never had placenta previa, and so I didn't exactly know at first, what that meant for me. Eventually came to understand, we were watching the placenta, and if it would move, then it was very likely I could still go on to have a normal delivery. But if it would not move enough, we would be talking about a C-section. And so that was something we were just kind of watching, and not really, there was a few other stipulations I had to have with that, but so far they had asked me, have you had any spotting or bleeding incidences? And thank God I had not. I think it was sort of God's mercy to me, knowing what I've been through, that I had not, had any bleeding yet with this pregnancy. And so they got all of the scans they needed to get, mainly when I went in for my 20-week sonogram, but they were not able to get all of the pictures of the heart they needed. And they were like, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just bring you back in. It's not a big deal. He was in a position," well, I didn't know it was a boy at the time, so they just said baby was in the position that we just couldn't get it and we'll have to come back. I don't recall why I felt uneasy about that. But there is just, I don't know, there's some motherly intuition, and ladies listening, you probably know, especially if you have perhaps gone through a complicated pregnancy or you've been through a loss, sometimes you just innately know something is not exactly right. And although I did have a feeling through the whole pregnancy that this baby would be okay, I just kind of had a feeling, and when I through my prayers, when I was asking God, that I knew that the baby would be okay. I felt like the Lord was really telling me that. But in that moment, and there was just something uneasy about them telling me they weren't able to get pictures of the heart. And so I remember when I went back, and I think I was about 24 weeks, they were able to get the pictures of the heart. And I remember kind of just watching up on the screen and, hoping that everything was okay. And actually, like that day, all the pictures they got of his heart, they said everything was okay, everything looked good. And it was a relatively uneventful appointment. But I still felt, I don't know why. I can't place why I felt that way. Perhaps it was just some motherly intuition, but I felt like, okay, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. They said everything is okay with his heart. And so everything was relatively still, uneventful for this pregnancy. I have had to watch my blood pressure in other pregnancies. This was one pregnancy where I was actually taking blood pressure medication in the pregnancy because prior to getting pregnant, I was sort of having a few struggles. And so we had decided to just stay on a medication that was considered safe for pregnancy. And so actually my blood pressures were beautiful through the whole pregnancy. I didn't really have to sit and worry about my blood pressures, which is something I've had to do in prior pregnancies and was just something that I would get anxious about. And so we didn't really have anything truly eventful, very eventful happen until about the first week of November. I remember just getting up in the middle of the night and seeing blood. So just kind of having a bleeding incident and feeling a little bit frightened, but knowing, I can still feel the baby. I know I have listened to Previa. There's like a reason for this. So sort of, getting my bearings together, my husband and I trying to figure out who's going to come over and watch our kids in the middle of the night so we can go into the hospital. Remember getting there and them checking everything. Heartbeat was still great. Everything was great with baby. Everything looked good also with my blood pressure, them being aware that I have to listen to Previa. They were just monitoring it. And I remember having a little bit of an incident, that initial incident, and then a little bit more on the way to the hospital. But kind of once I had gotten to the hospital, the bleeding had somewhat tapered off. And so they were just kind of monitoring me there, making sure that, things were just kind of tapering off and before they would send me back home. And for whatever reason, I think I might have been, I don't know if I was due for a sonogram or what the purpose was. I think they were wanting me to see maternal fetal medicine. And I hadn't gone there yet. I think it's mainly just because of my placenta previa, my age. So I was 39 at the time. And I think they were also just, wanting to monitor things because they knew my history with my blood pressure and things. And so I was supposed to be seeing maternal fetal. And so I think they, at that point, said, well, we'll just have you see them in the hospital because they come over to the hospital and you're already here. And so that visit in early November was actually the first time that we had any kind of clue that something might be going on with Nicholas's heart. And I remember the ped cardiologist came and spoke to me after the sonogram, and it wasn't like a alarming, like, oh, wow, your baby has something really serious and we need to talk about this. It was more just kind of, well, right now it appears that maybe one side of his heart is slightly enlarged and, we might have a slightly leaky tricuspid valve. His arch looks a little bit small. Because of these things, we're a little unsure if maybe the size of his arch is causing these things. But at this point in time, we don't really know what's causing this, and we may not know until probably after you deliver and after we're able to do an assessment on the baby, a fetal echocardiogram, an echocardiogram, on the baby after birth. And so I remember asking at that time, am I going to have to deliver elsewhere? Is this problem serious enough? Do you think that I will have to not deliver at this hospital? And at the time they said no, we'll just monitor, but we don't think there's a reason right now for you to deliver at another hospital. And so maternal fetal became aware of the problem, the issue, I guess, regarding Nicholas's heart at that time. And so that kind of went on their radar. And so they were just kind of watching me. And so I got out of the hospital and went back home, had Thanksgiving. all of this. It was a little bit of a crazy time. In the midst of all this, we were actually in the process of selling our home. So there were just a lot of things going on. But anyway, I think it was the beginning of December. I ended up having another bleeding incident at home. And my actual due date with Nicholas was, I think, January 11th. And I knew instinctively I was probably not getting to January 11th. We had been watching the placenta previa, and we were preparing for a C-section. It just had not moved. I was still hoping maybe it would move at the last minute, but it really wasn't. And so I kind of knew that we were, it had been a discussion with my OB, we're probably going to get you to 37 weeks or as close as we can get you to 37 weeks. And then we're probably going to deliver the baby just because, your previa is not moving. And when you have previa, we don't want to take a chance of you actually going into spontaneous labor. So I had kind of braced myself after this second bleeding incident that I knew I was probably going to the hospital and not leaving this time until I actually had the baby. So I went back in, checked everything again. Thank God, at least the bleeding incidents that I had were pretty short-lived, and they didn't continue, so they were at least happy about that. But at the time, I had another appointment and a sonogram scheduled with maternal fetal again, and just ended up being in the hospital again. And so they just decided to do that appointment. And so I remember, being in that sonogram with my husband, having the sonographer look at Nicholas, calling someone else in. I knew something was not good at that point, that something was obviously going wrong. Of course, they can't really say a whole lot to you when they're doing the sonogram. They're not really allowed to do that. So they took me back to my room, and I remember the pediatric cardiologist came in again and had one of the head doctors with her. And I kind of feel like I knew at that time whatever we were going to talk about was probably fairly serious. And so they basically told me, your baby's heart is not functioning like the way it's supposed to right now. We don't really know why. They may have told me at that point that the heart was enlarged even more. Of course, there was, they said the issue with the arch is a concern. We're not sure if the arch is causing the dilation of the heart. But at this point, your baby will likely need interventions after birth, and we cannot do that here. And so we're going to send you elsewhere. We're going to send you down to Barnes in St. Louis. And that was that. And I remember just kind of asking a few more questions, and I guess maybe, trying to search for more specific answers. And, I remember the pediatric cardiologist saying to me, this is what it is right now. I can't tell you what this is going to look like for your baby, when your baby's 16. And I think she did say at that point we still didn't know, but, I kind of got the sense, we were talking, she was talking to me. It was, we were already talking about, okay, well, once you come back, you're going to have follow-up appointments with the cardiologist, and this is probably going to be an ongoing thing. It was not anticipated that this was something I think that would be rectified. So essentially within, I don't even know, probably within an hour, I felt like it was so quick. They said, we're getting you a transport, you're getting transferred to Barnes Jewish in St. Louis, because they wanted me to be close to children's there for the baby. And so probably literally, within an hour and a half to 2 hours, I was put into the back of an ambulance, taken down to Barnes in St. Louis. So I got there, And I pretty much knew that's where I was staying. I think it was around December 11th or 12th at that time. And so I still had about a week and a half, almost 2 weeks of the pregnancy left, that I just had to be there at Barnes. And so once I was there, I had to continue to keep going for like checkups on the baby. And it was kind of strange. I feel like I sort of had mixed reactions from people. So, it was obviously serious enough that I needed to be somewhere else to deliver my baby. But then when we were talking, I had an appointment after they had looked at the baby again. And they were talking to me about, genetic heart defects. And the gentleman that I talked to at that appointment, it almost made it sound like, we're not 100% sure, but it looks like, from this particular sonogram, the arch does appear small, but we won't know yet. It could well actually still be functional. Your baby might not need surgery, and we won't really know that until, we see the baby. But, some other things were discussed in regards to what that process would look like if we needed to make the arch coming out of the heart larger, different things that we might do as time goes on regarding that issue. But it was like I didn't really get a sense from that particular doctor that I was maybe looking at something serious. And yet, as the doctors were making their rounds, I think there was another comment that was made, and they were just kind of waiting, this is the plan. And I think I might have said, well, if something in regards to, how much intervention he's going to need, or if he's going to need intervention. And there was another doctor that just kind of chimed in and said, oh, your baby will need intervention. And I don't know. I just remember at that moment, okay, thinking this is obviously pretty serious. I've kind of gotten some mixed messages from people, but, and so at that point, I really just had to surrender everything to the Lord. I have obviously gone through a lot of loss, and yet here we are, still looking at, here I am almost delivering a full-term baby and not knowing what that's going to mean for us. And so the plan was to get me to 37 weeks. They got me to 37 weeks. Actually, it was 36 weeks and 6 days, because 37 would have been on a Saturday, and they wanted to make sure they had the whole team there for the birth. And one of my daughters lucked out because her birthday is December 21st. She wanted to keep her own birthday, and so she was able to keep her own birthday. Nicholas was born on December 20th. And I remember them saying, we're going to deliver him. If it appears that he is not doing well and he needs to have intervention immediately, we're probably just going to have to go ahead and take him away. And so I said, okay, just do what's best for him. I know, that's what, I want is what's best for the baby. And so I remember the C-section actually went very, very smoothly. I remember just crying and crying when I actually saw a live baby with my husband, and they said it's a boy, and we had kind of had an intuition it was. And so since he was being born around Christmas, we had decided on the name Nicholas. And so that all happened, but a lot of what happened in the delivery room is not really, I was just kind of, I was obviously being operated on. My husband was more with Nicholas. I could tell there was a little bit of a concern, not like a major concern, but we were concerned. And so one of the doctors came over to me and said, he is kind of having some trouble breathing a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and take him over. And so he went over and he went into the CICU. So at Children's, they have the cardiac ICU unit for children. And so that's where we pretty much spent the next month of Nicholas's life. And I was back and forth. So I had with my fourth baby, Timothy, I remember I had been rehospitalized for some postpartum preeclampsia. And I had just actually listened to one of Annemarie's podcasts on the postpartum preeclampsia, someone else who was talking about it. And so, yes, with my fourth son, I had to be readmitted for the high blood pressures. I didn't really experience a lot of the symptoms that come with that, except the really high blood pressures, and I had major swelling. So I did have the swelling, and that was with my fourth baby. And so I remember doing the magnesium treatment, and I was there, and I got out, and it was just one incident, and then I was on blood pressure medication for a while, and it kind of evened out. But after Nicholas, I remember, things were okay. Things have always been okay for me the first 3-4 days postpartum. Nothing really goes wonky. But I remember having to leave him. So he was born on the 20th. And of course, everything was going okay with me. And so I needed to leave the hospital. And so I remember leaving. It was Christmas Eve, and just the worst feeling in the world, having to leave your baby behind, especially on Christmas Eve in the intensive care unit. And so I remember going home with my family and needing to be there for my other kids and needing to try to be excited about Christmas, but just not being there. I just was not there mentally. And I remember we had a bassinet set up in our house, and I saw it when I came home, and I literally asked my husband, just put it in the next room. I can't look at that right now. It's too painful. And so I remember I think it was Christmas Eve, or it might have been the day before Christmas Eve when I came home, but I do remember on Christmas Eve, the people at the cardiac ICU would call me frequently, give me updates. And I remember they asked us if they had permission to intubate him that day. He was struggling, and he had a partial lung collapse, and that was on Christmas Eve. And so we gave them permission to intubate him at that time. And so I think it was at that time, Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, I remember being with the family, but just checking my blood pressures and definitely recognizing they were going back up. And so we actually took the kids back up to the hospital. The kids got to see Nicholas in the hospital only because they had an exception that they let family visit for just like a few days around Christmas. And I was so grateful for that, because otherwise my children wouldn't have been able to see Nicholas. And so he did have the tube at the time. And so he had the breathing tube and like a ton of cords on him. It literally took 5 minutes just to hold my baby. Just so many cords. So many adjustments, so many things you had to do just to get him situated. But the kids were able to see him, and I stayed with him that night. But I remember the next day just looking at my blood pressures again and thinking to myself, I'm going to have to readmit myself. Getting to those dangerously high blood pressures. The team would make rounds. And so after Nicholas was born, the big thing was that they were watching for a certain, I think, ventricle or some part of the heart that stays open in utero that needed to close. And after that closed, they would be able to tell whether or not they thought his arch was too small and was causing the dilation of his heart. His heart was enlarged, I think, 2 or 3 times its normal size. They had showed us the x-ray, and it was significant. And so they were trying to wait to see how he would respond to that. Of course, they were running some other tests, but at the current moment in time, we still didn't necessarily have an official diagnosis for what was going on, except that he was experiencing heart failure. And so they basically had told us moderate to severe heart failure. And of course, so, I'm already postpartum. I am now experiencing postpartum preeclampsia symptoms, and I'm being told that my baby has moderate to severe heart failure of an unknown origin. So we really didn't know what was causing it. They were waiting. Once that valve or the ventricle, I think that they were watching, closed, they determined, we don't actually, his arch is small, but we don't actually think this is what is causing the issue. And so it was extremely frustrating for me, for my husband, for the team too, because there really wasn't necessarily an explanation or an answer. I remember them saying, you and your husband need to go through genetic testing. We need to see if there's a genetic reason, a genetic condition that he has that might be causing this. And so we went through the genetic testing. That came back relatively inconclusive. There really wasn't anything on that they thought that he had or that would be really causing what he was going through. And so, we could tell the team was getting frustrated. We obviously were becoming anxious as well because how do you fix a problem if you don't know what's causing it? And so, during this time, the only good thing about me being readmitted to the hospital was that it kept me close to Nicholas. And so I could just walk across the bridge, or somebody could take me if I wasn't feeling up to walking, and I could be there with him and then go back. But the annoying thing about being readmitted was I kind of had to be over in the birthing wing and the postpartum wing, and I couldn't really stay with Nicholas all the time. That was difficult. At the same time, when I was over with Nicholas in the CICU, that in itself was a little nerve-wracking because of all of the constant beeping and the monitors and things that go off constantly that just make you wonder, oh my gosh, what is going on now? What's going on with him? And so anyway, basically the long story short is he was intubated. They tried once to extubate him. It was unsuccessful. And so I remember my husband and I got a phone call from the doctor. I was not able to be in always at his bedside at their rounds. Of course, we have 4 other children. And so I was on these in and out admits to the hospital because of my blood pressure. They would get it under control. I would leave. It would start coming up again and not being under control. And this was, I think I ended up having two or three readmits due to my blood pressure. And I think it was obviously exacerbated by the fact that my son was in the cardiac ICU, even though I was, having this postpartum preeclampsia. And so I ended up telling them, I think we need to switch medications. Whatever we're doing isn't working. But they were getting concerned that there was something even further going on with me, why they couldn't get the blood pressure under control. And so they wanted to do an ultrasound, I think, of my kidneys and some other things just to make sure there was no underlying thing for me. And that all checked out, but I was kind of in and out of the hospital. And when I wasn't with Nicholas, I was trying to be with my other 4 children because we were in the middle of a move. And so it was just this really crazy time. And so I couldn't always be there when the doctors made their rounds, and I would always take their phone calls. But I remember this doctor insisting, they were saying, this doctor really needs to talk to you today. And I remember telling my husband, it's not good. I just know it's not good. And so, we had a pretty grim conversation that day with the doctor about, what we were looking at for Nicholas, that, they were going to try to extubate him again. But if that was not successful, we're looking at an indefinite hospital stay, likely going down the road of heart transplant. And, it was not a nice picture. And basically we said, well, if the extubation is successful, how quickly could he even come home? And they gave us a couple of months, and that was like the best case scenario. And so knowing that, I got to the hospital that day, and my husband and I are Catholic, and there was a priest that had volunteered to come up and pray with me. And he had a sister he was taking back to the airport from a retreat. And so I kind of let him know what was going on and said, we really, really need to pray. The extubation really has to be successful. And so we had been asking for some prayers from a particular saint that is on his way to becoming a saint, and we're asking for his specific prayers. And I remember going into the room with the priest and the sister and just me and Nicholas and saying this prayer, asking for Venerable Fulton Sheen's intercession, and praying to the Lord and begging the Lord, in addition to asking for Fulton Sheen's prayer, is just this prayer of a mother over her child, like, please, please just let him be okay and come out of this. And so we finished our prayer and they left, and Nicholas was getting a blood transfusion. I remember at that time because they said he's lost a lot of blood just because of all the, labs and everything we've had to take from him. And so he was getting a transfusion, and they felt that was going to give him the best success rate for being successfully extubated. And so I remember that evening I was sitting with him again, and there was a doc on call that came and talked to me and said, yeah, hey, and he came over and said, hey, this little guy, let's look at him. And he said, his echo looked great today. He said, yeah, it showed normal heart function. And this was astounding news, really, because since birth, his echoes had not shown normal heart function. And I was like, oh, wow, really? And so I knew that going into the extubation the next day, and they extubated him. It was very successful. They said he was doing great. I remember the first time I came in and I saw him without all the cords, and he was actually awake and looking around, and it was just this incredible moment of seeing him awake and alert. He had been sedated for much of his life since he was born. And so he was just looking around, taking everything in. It was just amazing to see, him not even really having any breathing assistance. And so, they actually said he's doing great. We're going to leave him here for now. But, if someone comes in and needs the room, we may end up moving him. And they actually ended up moving him out of the intensive part of the heart center within 2 days. He moved over to the other side. And so he had an NG tube for feeding, but he had started taking a bottle, and they were like, he's doing really great with the bottle, so we don't know if he's going to need to continue to have the NG tube. And so we were over in the other part of the heart center, the non-intensive part of the heart center, for about a week. And he just kept improving. And I think after he was extubated, his heart was still slightly enlarged. But after some more prayers, another echo showed that his heart had returned to normal size. And so he was doing great. Actually, he pulled out his own NG tube in the middle of the night, and they decided not to put it back in. And they were just truly astounded at his progress. I remember they were giving him some meds, obviously, for heart support, and said, well, we need to wean him off some of these IV meds so we can see that he's doing okay before he can go home. But we were basically in the other part of the heart center for a week, and then we were able to be discharged. And this was after a doctor telling us that it would be 2 months at best. The team was, quite frankly, astounded at his progress, and said they didn't really have an explanation for it, but they were just happy. And so I guess we pretty much spent about the entirety of a month, he and I both pretty much in the hospital, me with back and forth with a lot of readmits, and Nicholas over in the ICU. And we continue to go back to Children's for checkups. He's actually going to go back there probably in June, but in January we had 1 year of completely normal heart function. At that time, he was able to go off 2 of his 3 medications that he takes. And so when we go back in June, we're really, really hoping and praying he can go off his 3rd medication and just continue to live his best life. He is a joy to our family. He is definitely energetic and gets around like nobody's business. And if you were to look at him today, you would not know that that's how his life started. But it was a really insane postpartum experience. And so, yeah, I would just say to anybody who's listening, postpartum is definitely challenging, especially can be particularly more so when you are facing kind of like what we did, which was a late-term diagnosis of something that wasn't necessarily expected, and even unknowns after birth. And also with postpartum preeclampsia that I experienced, that's no joke, and the treatment is very difficult. And so, we made it through. And once we got home, things settled down and my blood pressures kind of evened out. I still had to take medication for a while. But that is our story. And so it was a little bit crazy, to say the least, but just so blessed that Nicholas is healthy and thriving, and that I bounced back relatively well after about my third readmit. And so it is a blessing to be his mom and to watch him grow. And I'm so grateful to be able to share